Hello, I'm just recording a brief preamble to episode 2 of the UFOcast, which Michael and I recorded a few weeks ago. The main reason for this is just to say thank you for all the feedback and subscribing that you've been doing before and since episode 1. And we are grateful for the comments, and thank you for our first iTunes review in the UK. Just a quick note to say, if you've left us a review on iTunes in another country, we won't see it unless you tell us to go look for it, because of the way that iTunes works. Email the show ufocast@yahoo.com. Also, just before we hit the opening credits, I'd like to give a big shout out to Kurt Metz, who messaged us via the Facebook page to say that he has some graphic design skill and would love to get involved. So from now on, as long as he's happy to continue doing it, Kurt will be doing the artwork for the podcast, and you'll be seeing that today for the first time. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of the UFOcast. I'm Michael.
And I'm Luke.
Today we're going to be talking about something to do with the computer. No, I did call it the computer affair, but as it was so eloquently pointed out via text message this morning, it's just called Computer Affair. It's episode 2 in our listening order, well, our watching order, of UFO, Jerry Anderson's Uber work, and today we're going to be chatting about it. So, I've got some notes. Have you?
No. Because I don't make notes. I just watch, and hopefully I will remember stuff. And then we finish recording, and I go, oh, we should have talked about that. So maybe in upcoming weeks I will make some notes. But for now, I will be guided by what notes you've taken. So hopefully we'll go through the episode roughly in order, and I will chip in with my thoughts. And if any of the things I want to talk about come up, I will jump in.
You see, I'm new to UFO. I had watched it when I was about 8, and it was broadcast on Tyne's TV. But to be honest, it's I'm definitely in the realm of the memory cheats. I so am. So I'm watching this going, I don't remember any of this. Also, the film Doppelganger, Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, used to be on around the same time when I was a kid growing up. And I've mixed up bits of that with UFO and all sorts, and I also had the 1970s annual. So really, I am coming to this kind of afresh. So I'm experiencing this as if it's on now, which, to be fair, is kind of cool. Also, I did a bit of a search on YouTube, and I found a few things. I found a making-of documentary published by Fanderson, which is available. So I'm definitely in the process of watching that. So if any of the listeners are interested in the waffle that we talk about, that's definitely something I'd point you in the direction of, because it won't cost you anything. But we are definitely here to talk about the computer affair. I'm sorry, computer affair. I will drop the, right? It's like the Pet Shop Boys. Ladies and gentlemen, Pet Shop Boys.
Pet Shop Boys.
Indeed, right. So you've got, now there's one thing that's in this version of Anderson which isn't in the previous. No, the other way around. Do you remember when you used to watch Murder, She Wrote? Bear with me, it makes sense.
Right.
And at the beginning, there would be like, on tonight's episode. American dramas used to do it all the time. And you'd sit there going, right, I've now seen the episode. What's the point? Like a pre-cap. That's what we call them in our house. It's basically tonight on. Now, you get that with modern daytime TV a lot these days, like documentaries and stuff. But old-fashioned dramas used to have that. Thunderbirds were notorious for it. It was like they would do a bit of music, and they would do a clips of all of the exciting adventures and the rescuers and stuff like that before the episode started. And as a kid, even when I was really small, it used to drive me mental, because you'd be going, right, I've sat down, I've got my crisps, I'm in my sleeping bag, it's Saturday morning, I'm in front of the TV, I'm watching this. That was far too much information. I'm going to watch this, and then they show you all the best bits. And it's like, see, it's like watching a trailer for a film immediately before watching a film, and you've already signed up to watch the film. Don't show me the trailer. So this is missing from UFO, and I'm eternally grateful. There isn't a tonight on this episode, which happened in lots and lots of the other Andersons. I think Stingray did it and a few others, but there was definitely Thunderbirds was the big perpetrator. So
Thunderbirds was the big one, and I believe that Space 1999 did it as well.
It so did, and it's a habit I'd like them to have got out of, because I remember when I watched Space 1999 on VHS, I used to fast forward through those bits, because it was like, no, I am going to watch this. Now, one thing that I am experiencing with UFO early on is it's a bit slow.
Yes, it's a very slow-paced show, and you have to get yourself into that mindset of this is the speed of telly. And it's interesting as well that somebody was pointing this out in relation to the new Star Trek. I mean, obviously, it doesn't need to fit in with commercial breaks and stuff because it's on Netflix and CBS. But it's the equivalent of an hour show these days, and it's like 38 minutes long because you've got 22 minutes of adverts now in an hour's slot. Whereas UFO filled the same hour slot on independent TV, but it's 50 minutes long when you take out the advert breaks, and it's just again a sign of the times, really, that something made back then, you got a lot more program for your hour slot. But having said that, the pace of TV means that you probably still get more packed into your 38 minutes today than you do in an episode of UFO.
Without question. And I know we said last time that it's always going to be of its time. You know, let's face it, we've got to cast our minds back. This is a programme from 1970. All right, it's new to me, and I'm watching it and I'm going, yeah, this is great, fantastic, which, you know, I am. I am here to praise it, not to bury it. That's fair enough. But it is, you know, we're not going to like dance around and go, oh, it's all fabulous. It's got its flaws. And considering this is the second story to be made, then the flaws are still going to be on display. I mean, let's face it, nothing's perfect early on anyway. So I'm fine. But you know what?
So can I take it that you weren't a particular fan of this episode?
Well, you know what? I was finding it a bit of a drag. And it wasn't until I watched it again, because I have watched it more than once, because that's the kind of guy I am. And I watched it and it was like, oh yeah, actually, it was fine. I let it wash over me. Because, you know, when when you happen to be at film school, because we both did, and they do the whole show, don't tell. The one thing with Anderson is you get a lot of show. You get a bit too much show. It's like the whole episode, this whole episode opens with I still want to call him Radcliffe, I'm sorry, going to the moon, right? Now,
yes.
What he does is he gets in the very nice aeroplane that separates from the very nice spaceship in high orbit, which is the way, you know, spaceships should actually work. And then once it separates off, it travels through space really slowly and then orbits the moon slowly and then goes vertical for no reason and then lands.
Yes.
Right, and then slowly, and then eventually some doors open and he gets out and has a chat with a woman in a wig, right? Who admittedly runs the place, right? Yep. Apparently she runs the place, except of course later on we find out there is a commander of Moonbase who happens to be a bloke. Early on you were thinking, hey, it's all run by women. That's some reason. That works, but let's go with that. I'm happy with that. And then all the pilots are men, but we'll do the whole gender arguments much later.
Yeah.
So you've got to... If it was made now... you'd get a very, very quick montage of a trip to the moon. Now, I know what you've done is you've spent a lot of money on the models. A lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of setup. Because let's face it, these are models. These are not CGI. And they look so much better. Yeah. And one major thought when I was watching this, because I am all over the place, is, right, nobody's going to come out well from this story. My wife likes to tease me. She teases me on one specific article of faith, something that dominates my entire worldview. I believe we landed on the moon in 1969. She likes to mess with my head because she's a perfectly well-balanced person who believes perfectly reasonable things and in science and everything. She believes we didn't land on the moon in 1969. She believes we landed in 1970. Right? She's not arguing that we've not been to the moon.
Right.
She also thinks we kept going to the moon in the 80s, but I think that's during a particularly large wind-up session. Right? Because she knows it really... I've got no sense of humour when it comes to this.
So
it's
basically
like,
what you're saying is that your wife buys into the conspiracy theory as far as 1969 goes.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, they needed to fulfill
They
Kennedy's...
needed to get there while Kennedy said by the end of this decade. They had 6 months left to spend, and they went, sod it, let's just pretend, right? And looking at these models, you could see that they could have managed it, because the model work on this is exemplary. We were looking at dodgy foam monsters in Doctor Who, right? A similar time, you've got John Pertwee with a bunch of glove puppets being dinosaur invasions, and you take it up against something that looks as glorious as this, and you think, how come Doctor Who comes out better? Now, I know there's a whole different argument for a different time on that one, and I know we'll be covering that over the next year. Trust us, we will. But the model work here is glorious. The moonscape, you could see how they could fake it. Film that with a really crappy black and white camera rather than in 35mm film, and you've got your faked moon landing much better than Kubrick ever could have managed. And I know lots of people worked on this and 2001. But you know what I mean. Can you see my argument? I'm sitting there going, God, she could be right. And then I start doubting myself.
No.
So my wife really does like to wipe me.
She's not right. Yes. I think the reason that I don't believe in these silly conspiracy theories is just the number of cock-ups that governments make over trivial things. Oh, yeah. And the number of people that you'd have to keep quiet, it's just ridiculous. But yes, it's funny the different perspectives people have on these things.
Me and you are completely on the same page.
Yeah.
She keeps going on about the size of the computers they had couldn't possibly have done it. And it's like, you don't need a computer. You just need someone who's really good at maths.
Yes. Also,
which we've seen in other films, but that's another story.
Yes. And if there's a fascinating video on YouTube somewhere about the fact that they didn't have the technology to produce enough slow-mo, because the idea being that the astronauts on the moon is basically people on Earth slowed down.
Okay.
And they didn't have the technology to slow down an extended piece of footage. So basically, you couldn't have faked that bit in real time anyway. But we've got so far off track, haven't we?
We so have, right.
So
so you've got.
But anyway, if I can come
glorious
on
models.
What you've been talking about,
please interrupt.
I mean, this is classic Anderson, really.
Yeah.
If you watch a Jerry Anderson show, the launch sequences of whatever craft we're talking about, whether it's Stingray, whether it's the Thunderbird craft, they're always majored upon in those first few episodes. And by the time you get to later episodes in the series, those sequences are edited down, because you've seen the full thing at the beginning of the series, you know what's going on, and so they can show you a shortened version as shorthand.
But it's still from the original footage, because what they've done is they've just had to recreate it. So you're getting 4 or 5 minutes, or in some cases 20 minutes of a program that already exists. So you have to create less program, because skydiver taking off will always look like skydiver taking off. So you just have to dig out the old footage, put clips in, insert them, it's done. Buck Rogers in the 80s was appalling for that from the States. It was like there was only 4 shots they had of spaceships flying past, and they managed to make entire programs out of that. That's my overriding memory of that. So yeah, I can forgive them for that. It's a budgetary thing as well.
Yeah, because there are, in almost every episode, there is episode specific special effects footage that they've shot.
Without question, yes.
You know that you're like, well, that shot there, that's their generic, as you say, skydiver taking off shot. That's the generic moon based thing. But then there are always things that are telling the story this week that need to be shot this time. And so you can forgive the fact that they had to reuse footage as a matter of budget.
Yeah, yeah. So you've got that. On the subject of which, apart from the fact that these models are gorgeous, right? They are truly gorgeous. You've got the live action versions of the models where you've got the cars, which I'm sure we didn't discuss last time. For the human set, they're so nice. Apparently, the shell of one's out there somewhere that needs a refit. But
I just like the fact that everybody drives the same car.
Yeah, completely. But then they refer to them as the Shadowmobile. A shadow car. Somebody's because we deal with this in the next episode. He's driving a shadow car, and you're like, "What? Everyone's driving the same car, and it's all bronze? Okay, that's fine." Yeah. But yeah, okay. So we'll admit there's padding. There'll always be padding. It's something we don't need to discuss anymore.
Yeah.
One person's padding is another person's character development.
Yes, that's true. Should we talk about what the episode is actually about?
Well, we can, right? Okay, you've got the guy who goes to the moon, and we're only 15 minutes in, and we haven't done that. I'm so sorry. Never let me lead again. Right,
it's fine.
So we go to the moon, and on the moon there is an incident. A UFO passes. It's always a UFO, and it passes, and the interceptors go up, and something goes wrong. One of the interceptors ends up being a write-off. Somebody dies. A UFO gets through and heads to Earth. And on Earth, oh yeah, very exciting, they decide to have, because it's just like real life, a bit of an investigation to find out what went wrong. Let's all rub our chins. Now, there's a lot of reports going to and from Earth. These days it would literally just be email. But if you want a report from Moonbase, you don't just get the report, you have to send someone up to collect it and have a chat.
And
which
print
I
it out
found
on
a bit
paper.
weird. And print it out on paper, which you've had to take to the moon in the first place and then bring home. That I do find a bit ludicrous. But, and they're all talking about, 20% more spares need to be kept on the moon. Oh yeah, it's cutting edge, it's riveting stuff. The Straker decides to bring everyone back to Earth and give them a good old-fashioned interrogating. Now, everyone says they're frightened of Straker, but he doesn't exactly come across as a particularly frightening person. Or is that just me?
I think he comes across as a very humorless person.
That's true.
And so you can't imagine going for a pint with him or being friends with him. There are episodes later in the series which do humanise him to a certain extent, but I think, and particularly with this episode being Computer Affair, the focus on computers and computers making decisions and people making decisions, that it's a deliberately the show is set up such that Freeman is the instinctual guy, and Straker is the kind of analytic, follow the computer kind of guy. And I can understand why people would be quite scared of that kind of person, because you can't reason with a computer, or there's no emotional context for that relationship. So I think on that level they might find him quite scary. And as we saw last week, he did give Ford a bit of a dressing down for messing up a very simple procedure. So when it comes to something where your actions have possibly led to the death of someone else, maybe you're going to be slightly worried when you get back to Earth that your boss is going to tear you off a strip.
No, that makes absolute sense, I suppose, yeah. So we now switch from, obviously there's the sideline of, hey, everyone, let's try and find this crashed UFO somewhere, which has buried itself under the water, which is kind of cool. And it's a lovely effect. And it lands in the worst place imaginable, Canada. That's an actual line from the episode. Where's the UFO come down? It's come down in the worst place imaginable. What do you mean it's the worst place imaginable? That just made me laugh far too much.
Yes. Hello to our Canadian friends.
Indeed, yeah. So
I think the point of that was more that most of Canada is uninhabited wilderness. Which actually, from the point of view of the aliens, you're like, well, they're coming to Earth to steal organs. So why are they landing in uninhabited Canada? But that's
clearly Canadian organs are of a higher quality. That must be it. Perhaps that's why they land in England. We've got the National Health Service. Canada's got a pretty good health service, and they just want the organs of people who've been looked after. There we are. We've now explained so much.
We have now explained it.
No, not at all, really. You've got your narrative split into two. You've got the relatively exciting "Let's find the flying saucer" storyline, but on the other time, we've got adventures in human resources, dun dun dun, where the people on the moon base are sent for a lovely chat and some psychoanalytic nonsense with some word association and some stress monitoring and being filmed and things like that. Is it me, or is the psychiatrist just the dodgiest character in Moonbase, in the Hall of Shadow?
In what way do you find Dr. Schroeder dodgy?
I don't know. It's just the way he is. I think I've seen him in other ITC dramas as suspect, swarthy character. and I've just associated the two. I genuinely think that.
He's not very likeable. He doesn't last very long, and his replacement is a much more interesting character, and we'll come to him in a few weeks' time.
When we find out who replaces him, that's fair enough.
No, you're right, and he was rather brusque in episode 1, and I mean I know there's this particular line that he says that you want to talk about in the context of this.
I'm heading towards that quite rapidly. Yeah, so he interrogates everyone, but you go on.
Yes. No, go on. I mean, I want to see where you take this.
He interrogates everyone. Now, I'm not sure if, because I'm, from the 70s myself, I'm not sure of the politically correct term. But let's just say there is a white pilot, a black pilot, and there's the commander of Moonbase, who's the woman who's normally wearing a purple wig, but she's not on Earth. You must leave your purple wigs on the moon.
On the moon,
yeah. Apparently, because I've actually looked this up, Sylvia Anderson thought that the wigs signified rank. Now, I don't know if that's a real thing or if it's just something I read on a Wikipedia page.
I mean, the thing that I read was that Jerry Anderson liked the look of them on the sets of Moonbase and that particular lighting. So I don't know.
That makes even more sense.
Yes. Sense. And before we get back to that, just because I meant to talk about this last week, if you're a Doctor Who fan and you think you've seen bits of Moonbase set before, you have, because the BBC got hold of a load of props from Moonbase and built a computer out of them in a John Pertwee story called The Green Death.
Oh, it's Boss, is it?
So Boss is made of bits of Moonbase.
Oh, bless.
That's a complete aside. On you go,
yes,
Michael.
But it's, well, all right, so this is where you've got Jerry Anderson dealing with race. There you go. Possibly for the first time. I don't know. I'm willing to be drawn on this. I mean, it might have been dealt with in other episodes. But as you said last week, it's coming. Well, it's here now. And the psychiatrist says something reasonably offensive. And by reasonably, I mean very. Yep. And it's the sort of writing that now feels A, clumsy, and B, you couldn't even get that on TV now. It just, I don't think it would happen. I'm surprised when UFOs repeated that it's still there.
I mean, so how did you interpret their line?
Right, I know, because obviously immediately the guy who's being interrogated says, why didn't you react to it? And he went, oh, I thought you were joking. And it was like, oh, you didn't mean it. And it's like, yeah, I get that, right? I do. As a sci-fi viewer, I'm all for different views of the future. I want to see things. I want to see how people are imagining it. That's fine, right? But it was saying, oh, that's a bit obvious, a bit. It's one of those moments where you just go, could you do that again, only better? That's how I felt.
Yes.
It was like, could you just try a bit harder to get that right and get the context right and make it right? It just didn't feel very good.
Yeah.
But I suppose, as a middle-aged white man, I'm aware of political correctness, and you're watching yourself because you want to make sure you get it right.
Yeah.
And as a writer, I want to push boundaries, but I want to make sure that my worlds that I'm creating work, and it didn't feel like it worked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Because I think the idea, and I forget which episode this comes up in, but it comes up in a later episode where Straker himself addresses it and basically says that racial tensions have burned themselves out.
Yeah, it says 5 years ago you could have got away with something like that, but not anymore. So around 1975, which of course we all know is a very tolerant time in the UK,
exactly, but
racism burned itself out.
Exactly. So this is looking to a future in which this black guy can be an astronaut and that not be a thing, his skin colour not be a thing that's commented upon. And this psychiatrist is deliberately throwing out a racist line to him to see whether this is something that he's used to hearing or not. And his response is well, I thought you were joking. And when he's asked, do you kind of hear this language used on Moonbase? And he says no. The psychiatrist says, that's good. So we're supposed to believe that this is now a world where racism is no longer a thing.
No, that I can completely get on board with. I can,
but just like you say, the way it's handled is just so clunky and so on the nose that it just feels really cringy.
It's the equivalent of all of a sudden in a model shot seeing a load of strings, and you go, "Oh, could you have done that a lot better?" Because there's been no strings at all in any of the model shots. There might be later, but I've not seen any.
No, I mean, it's been exemplary.
It's the model work's glorious, and I know that's kind of why I watched it in the first place as a kid, because I loved the ships and stuff. But now that from an adult point of view, and I'm watching this now, because apparently it was aimed at adults, which I didn't get at all at the time, and now I'm so seeing that, because I'm literally experiencing this for the first time. So yeah, that basically my complaint is it was a point that needed to be made. It still felt a bit clunky, but it was 1970. When in a world where Love Thy Neighbour was still on TV and on the buses and all of those other things were on.
Yeah.
And it's only 3 years after Star Trek and things like that. And, you know, with a line like that, it's being written to be sold to bits of America where, you know, right-wing groups still would stop stuff from being shown on TV. So that's kind of brave. I didn't like the psychiatrist. He's got a point to make, and the point is that there's the possibility that Lieutenant Purplewig and
Lieutenant Ellis,
Lieutenant Ellis, who you can get action figures of. Who thought that?
Really?
Yeah, you can buy not just action figures. You can buy talking action figures, variety ones. You can buy a model kit to build a Lieutenant Ellis. If you go on eBay, you'll find some very odd things.
Okay.
There have been all sorts out there, and there's also a glorious manga designed one as well, as a figure, because it was huge in Japan apparently in the early 2000s, and I'm still trying to find out how and why. But it does make sense because there's a lot of differentiating between characters with hair designs in manga, so that appeals, that goes further on. But my background's in animation. We can discuss that another time as well. So we're back in the story. There's the possibility of the relationship between two of the characters, and from an audience point of view, in the 70s, you might be going, "Oh, that's interesting," because basically she's trying to save someone. That from our point of view, it's just she might fancy him. She's tried to save him. She countermanded the computer's orders.
And the other guy got killed. Yes.
And the other guy got killed. So one person got killed, right? And please stop letting me calling him Radcliffe. Right?
Freeman.
Say after me. Freeman. When Freeman says, no, the humans were in charge, it's fine, right? There's a bit of tension, apparent tension. You can't see it. But it's as if we are told there's tension, but we don't see any tension.
Yeah.
Saying, "Oh no, I believe in humans, not computers," and it builds up. Now, in sci-fi, as opposed to real life, always the people who err on the side of caution and are human are the people who are right. These days, it very rarely happens. Now, I know did you hear about the guy in the news who died very recently, who in 1981 saved the world by ignoring the computer, who told him the Americans had launched against the Russians?
Yes. Stanislas Petrov, I think his name was.
That's the man.
Yes.
And he saved the world basically by going, "That computer's faulty."
Yeah.
Which I think's glorious and very Russian. Yes. I do like that.
Yes.
Well, so we do have people who will ignore computers. I can't see that happening these days, which is terrifying. Well, because everyone wants someone to blame.
Yes, and this is the fascinating aspect of the episode for me. Because whilst the tests that the personnel do don't seem to bear any relation to actually predicting anything. I think would you agree with that? That the way that they're visually represented, that actually this is very prescient in what it's displaying. Now, allow me to go on a slight rabbit trail. My job is as a video editor and filmer, and I can't go into too many specifics because I'd be betraying client confidentiality. But in the last few years, I have done quite a bit of work in the area of forensic risk assessment.
Okay.
Not doing it myself, but editing videos where people are being trained on how to do it.
For the sake of people who are a bit dim, i.e. me, what's that then?
So, and if anybody in that field is listening, I hope I don't mangle what your field does, but in essence, it's talking about assessing people, and we're talking mainly about people in the criminal justice system, and in a lot of cases specifically people who have sexually offended. It's assessing those people to discover what risk factors were involved in why they offended, and what protective factors are involved now that might stop, and how those things all interplay to figure out why those people, whether those people would offend again.
Okay.
If they were released back into the community, for example, or in the prison system, what kind of treatment do those people need? And it's part of doing these trainings has been hearing about the history of that field and how they have moved away from clinical judgment, where it was basically a psychiatrist or any kind of professional basically making a judgment. Right,
yeah,
and there would be no justification for that. They would just be like, "Well, this is my clinical opinion as a clinician. Believe me."
So the entire outcome was in one person's hands.
The entire outcome was in one person's hands, and it was based on their subjective interpretation of the case. And the research has been done to say that actually that is not a very good way of assessing people. That the chances of someone being correctly assessed for their risk level is chance, or in some cases worse than chance,
because people have their own agendas and worldview, and they're bringing their own baggage.
Yes, and actually the research, when UFO was made, for example, the research had not been done to understand what risk factors were actually important. And since the late 80s, early 90s, through to today, a lot of research has been done into those factors that are statistically significant for predicting any number of outcomes. And what this has led to in the field is a huge plethora of risk assessment instruments, and these can range from anything from a simple questionnaire to and this is where it relates to what we're talking about today, computer programs which will ask a series of questions and then will analyse that data and give a risk level. Now, obviously,
these programs have been written by teams rather than a specific person, because you'd be back in the same.
And these programs have been based upon the research that has been done on criminal populations. And so we can actually say that based on the data that we have, we can then do a risk assessment on a particular person. Now, they are not 100% proof, but the chances of predicting your risk correctly have gone up significantly. So it's not like flipping a coin anymore like it used to be. It's much more, in some cases, 70-80% accuracy as to whether somebody will reoffend. And so it's fascinating to me watching this episode, having been doing a lot of that work, to see a prediction of a future where these methods could be put into place, where the data could be collected and a prediction could be made as to what was going on. And I don't think we're necessarily in a place where you could then say, well, that there's definitely a relationship going on between these two people and that was the cause of this accident. But it's just interesting that that's what this episode is predicting, and some of that has actually come to pass in the real world.
Right, no, that makes absolute sense. It genuinely does. And this podcast was just in danger of becoming fascinating. So at the risk of stopping all of that interesting nonsense, should we return to what happens next in the plot? Because you've got... now this is the point for me where it all goes a bit Star Trek.
Right.
Because the UFO turns up, right?
Yeah.
So it actually goes, hello, I've been hiding under the water, in this same effect but played backwards. And then it leaves and lands, and then your aliens go wandering. So they decide to Freeman, there you go, decides to send a team in using the Shadow mobiles, which admittedly are ridiculously cool.
Yep.
And they land in a ship that isn't Thunderbird 2, and they all go for a drive around a model of Canada, of Canada, and But the team he's selected is made up of the people who've just come from the moon, because obviously they're experts in driving mooncraft and don't have any issues with, low gravity or having to do exercise or anything like that. They're just the people he decides to take with him, just like Star Trek, classic series, where it's like,
Yes.
yep, here's our ground crew. Oh, look, it's the same people as last week. There's only 7 people, and they're going. And now, unlike Star Trek, if you've got the Next Gen, you've got Picard, who is Straker, who stays in the office.
Yeah.
You've got Freeman here, who's, I'm guessing, number 1, who gets to go with them and go on their ground mission thing. So, it stretches credulity a bit, but it is really important for the plot because Purple Wig Girl decides... I'm going to... You know what? Next time, I'm going to have a little chart with everyone's name on.
Yes.
And Purple Wig Girl decides to send her potential boyfriend into action and take on the alien.
Yes.
I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but let's face it, at the end of this episode, there's yet another alien autopsy.
Yes. And our 2 lovebirds go for a drink.
Without purple wigs on either of them.
Yes. Yes. And this is one of those... I think this is probably one of the first times in the show where we really see them trying to mesh the model work with the live action stuff.
Yes,
because we've got the whole thing of like the mobiles are clearly models driving through the forest, and then there's a point where one of the mobiles gets blown up. So they're like, "Well, we'll send another one in, but you've got to stop below the ridge because otherwise you'll get blown up by the UFO." So we're then going to go in on foot. And obviously, they never built an exterior mobile set, so you don't get to see the actors come out.
Which is a huge oversight.
I know, but you never get to see the actors come out of it, which means you have to kind of cut to, and now they're in a wood. And so it's very easy to see the transition between, here's the model wood, and here's the actual wood.
They learned that lesson on Space 1999. There are definitely some exterior eagle shots with people in them.
Yes. So, and obviously, there isn't a full-size UFO prop either. So essentially, you've got, in the model world, you've got...
That was one of my questions I was going to ask at some point. Is there a full-size model of a UFO somewhere?
I'm pretty sure there isn't. I mean, I don't recall everything about the show, but I'm pretty sure you don't actually get to see one that close.
They always land behind a bush, which is something that's really... That if there was a UFO drinking game, every time there's a UFO behind a bush... I would definitely knock one back because that is needed. And I don't drink very much at all, so I'd be plastered within minutes of this program. Yes. So you've got that whole crossover between live action models and
Yeah, and the only thing that ties it together is Bradley looking through his binoculars. And so you get here's the live-action shot of Bradley looking through his binoculars, and then we get to see, he's looking at a model of UFO in his binoculars. Yeah. And then the camera
But his binoculars do look just like Luke Skywalker's as well, because he's got futuristic binoculars.
They do, but this is like 6 or 7 years before the shooting of Star Wars, so UFO had them first. So, and then you basically have some very cleverly selected camera angles, such that you never see from behind the shadow personnel looking towards where the UFO should be, and so they sort of just about get away with it, and you can almost believe that they are in the same place. Now, obviously, today, if you were doing that kind of thing, you'd have green screen shots, and you'd be able to place the actors into a CGI background. But back then, it was much more tricky and obviously a lot more expensive to do that kind of thing, and so you can understand why they didn't do it.
I'm sure there is a point of view shot from inside a mobile looking out, travelling towards, so I think that's a matte shot of a UFO, but that could be memory cheating. But that would be a matte shot.
Yeah. And
which
so
works.
we get... Yes, of course it does. And so we get a brief gun battle, an alien gets his faceplate shot off, and as you say, we're then into, it's another alien autopsy!
Woohoo! And again, with the UFO drinking game, knock one back.
And are we going to learn anything different from what we learned last week?
No.
No.
It's a no, isn't it? Yep, it's a no.
No. What we do learn is that Straker is prepared to inject an alien with a truth drug, knowing that it might kill him.
But he's willing to take that responsibility. Grrr.
Yes, I'm willing to take that responsibility, and so the alien screams and dies.
At no point have they thought, let's make a load of the special liquid that they seem to breathe and create some sort of vat, which I'm sure is what they do in Torchwood, so that when they got a prisoner, they could put a prisoner in somewhere where they could survive.
Yes.
Yeah. So doesn't he scream pointlessly?
Yes,
and then die?
Screams
yeah.
pointlessly. And there's the whole thing during Straker's interrogation where he doesn't even establish whether the alien can speak English. He establishes that the alien can hear by making a sudden noise, but he doesn't establish that the alien can speak English. So the idea that this truth drug, even once administered, is going to elicit some
the
useful
ability to hear an alien language. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, it's a bit. Yeah, it's a bit obsessive of Straker, I think.
Where Straker's interrogating, he hasn't even bothered turning up to the office. He phones it in. He literally interrogates someone over Skype. He's got a TV screen with his face on.
I think that's next week's episode.
That's next week. Yeah, sorry, he can't even be bothered to turn up to the torturing.
Yeah.
No, that is next week, isn't it? It's so next week's episode. But yeah, he interrogates someone over Skype, which is obviously a very important technique that has been used in Guantanamo Bay, apparently.
Yeah. Yes, but in the future, Skype only works with black and white TVs.
That is true, but that's another story for another time. Actually, they are all using that. Let's discuss that technology next time.
Yes,
what we need to discuss is the fact that this episode, people think of it. Oh, it's the race one. Yeah, it is, but it's also episode 2, and you're still establishing who everyone is.
Yeah. Now, can we briefly talk about dating?
We can. I'm not very good at it, but
no, not that. Not so. Now, I was only half paying attention at the very end of the episode, but I'm pretty certain that the bottle of wine that they have is a 1984 vintage.
Right, yeah, that's fine, yeah.
And
okay.
so we've skipped forward although the title sequence is still telling us every week that this is 1980. Yes, it's 1980, everybody. I'm pretty certain that they have a bottle of 1984 vintage. So that's another thing that completely screws up the timeline of UFO if you watch it in production order, because it doesn't really make sense for this episode to happen straight away, because just simply according to the bottle of wine, it should be happening several years later.
Is it by any chance, and I am a massive apologist, I'm willing to try and make unit dating work. That's how bad I am. Is it not an 1884 bottle?
I'd really have to go back and watch the episode again to see whether they spell out the full year.
If anybody out there has bought the Blu-ray, you can have a look for us.
Yes.
Because we're going from the DVD...
Well, I think it's referred to in the dialogue, so even we would be able to go back and watch it and find out.
I'll put my hands up and say I missed that one, so well done, Anderson, for getting that one past me.
Yes. Do we have anything else to say about the episode before we go on to actors?
No, let's do the actors. Let's hit it, because I'm so up for that, yeah.
Well, so before we get into...
the Prisoner Watch and Who Watch.
Prisoner Watch and Who Watch.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice any dubbing going on in this episode?
Oh, now, I just thought it was my... No, you go on. I didn't. So, I'll put my hands up and say I didn't.
Anybody who knows anything about the production of UFO, please get in touch and tell me if I'm correct about this. But in episode 1, and this is definitely true, the astronaut Lou Waterman, who is the sort of third wheel in this whole thing, he's the astronaut that survives who isn't anything to do with the love... thing.
He's the one who's just sent back to Moonbase and gone, off you go, you've filled your bit of the plot, yep.
I think he's an Australian or a Kiwi, so he definitely has an accent that's kind of somewhere down under, softened by being in the UK for a bit. Anyway, in episode 1, he was dubbed by Jeremy Wilkin, who we talked about last week.
We did.
Is the skydiver dude who played Virgil in Thunderbirds, the later bit of Thunderbirds. And I have no idea why, but I was watching the episode and I go, why do you have a different voice? That's not your voice. And then in this episode, he's got his normal voice.
Yes. And
then in this episode, the Interceptor pilot who dies, I'm almost certain he's being dubbed by a different actor as well. And that in episode 1, we heard his real voice. Not only does the guy die, but he doesn't even get to die using his own voice. No, and please, if anybody knows that this is the case, and I'm almost certain he's been dubbed by Gary Files. We talked about Gary Files last week, who was the guy who played Captain Magenta and Captain Scarlet, and who appears briefly with his back to the camera in Identified, which we talked about last time.
Does that even count?
Well, I don't know. I'm almost certain it's him dubbing this astronaut. And it's funny, actually, because the title sequence is made from clips of these first 3 episodes, the clip of him just before he dies is in the title sequence every week. Poor chap.
Now, was that a buyout, or does he get paid an appearance fee? I'd say that would be a buyout.
I have no idea.
If you're going to appear in the opening titles, it would have to be a buyout, just for... Because otherwise you get an appearance fee per episode every time you appear.
Yes.
Because I remember discussing with someone, some professional, while I was at university, saying, I try to avoid having people in your opening sequences because their agents could be squirmy.
Exactly.
And ask for appearance fees every episode, which makes sense.
Certainly, as Doctor Who fans, we know that there have been issues with releasing certain music tracks on DVD because they were negotiated at a one-time thing back in the day. And so there's been certain things that have had to been renegotiated for release on DVD. Now, there's an episode of UFO later in the series where Get Back by the Beatles is played.
Ooh.
But it was negotiated at the time that this would be able to be released in the future. Lou Grade was clearly a far-sighted chap. And so there's been no problem at all, as far as I'm aware, with releasing UFO with that bit of music intact.
Which is odd, because
it was
the
negotiated
Beatles were
at the time.
Doctor Who fans.
Yes.
Weirdly, yes.
Yes. But yes, so I think ITV had or Lou Grade had a different approach to negotiating these kind of things anyway. So I think you're probably right. They would have made sure that they didn't have to pay all the actors in the title sequence every week because that would have got quite expensive.
Right. I've taken you off topic. Get back.
No, that's fine.
Not get back in this Beatles sense.
Let's dive in with Prisoner Watch.
Right.
Now
I can categorically say I saw no one.
Well, and you would be right. So there were no prisoner actors in this one. But the reason I bring it up now is because I noticed a couple of behind the scenes personnel, which we could highlight every week because they're on every episode. But the Prisoner and UFO share 2 major behind the scenes personnel, and that's the casting director, who was Rose Tobias Shaw. So she was the casting director for UFO and also for The Prisoner. And the director of photography, Bernard J. Stafford, who, if you're not sure what a director of photography does, that's the person who organises what the camera looks at, the lighting, and the visual look of the show from a camera point of view.
It's what a lot of people actually think a director is.
Yes, and if you're an American, this is what would be known as a cinematographer.
Right.
It's the same role, and actually back then it was also known as a lighting cameraman.
Which doesn't sound half as good.
It doesn't sound half as good, but if you hear someone talk about a lighting cameraman or director of photography, they're talking about the same kind of job. And so if you notice any similarities between the way that this show looks and The Prisoner, you would now understand why, because they were shot by the same person. And it would also explain why certain actors who were in The Prisoner crop up, because, as I said, we have the same casting director.
Yeah. Apparently, I read this week as well, Patrick McGowan, not a fan. He said some fairly derogatory things about UFO at the time.
It doesn't surprise me.
But Patrick McGowan could be a little bit grumpy.
He was a bit grumpy, wasn't he?
Yeah. It's just he knew Ed Bishop, apparently, and I did a bit of research. One thing that I do need to mention at this point is, and I know it's not connected with anything, but one of the things that Ed Bishop liked about working with Jerry Anderson isn't the fact that all of the characters, he used to hire everyone for bit parts, rather than just say, get someone to do a voiceover. Think Inferno with the voice on the radio, and it's clearly John Pertwee going, can you just do this? For Anderson, they always got somebody new in. And this is the important bit, especially in light of modern practices, there was parity on pay for everyone, which is incredible if you think about it, because we haven't even got that now.
No.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that that Ed Bishop really liked working for the Andersons. Now, whether that's actually true or whether it was just something said in an interview or something that Ed was told, I don't know yet, but I'm very interested to find this out, because I find that really impressive if it's true.
That is fascinating, yeah.
So anyway, right. So a lot of behind-the-scenes crew for Prisoner and this crossover. No one on Prisoner Watch, but how are we on Doctor Who Watch?
Well, so we have Doctor Who Watch this week. We have 3 actors to talk about, and they're all really minor parts, and only one of them I actually spotted at the time and was like, oh, is that him? So there is a Moonbase guy who I think he literally has like one or two lines, and he was one of the people that you were referring to earlier who talks about Straker being this kind of monster that they're going to have to go back and talk to. And that was a guy played by Nigel Lambert, who Doctor Who fans will know. Well, Doctor Who fans will know him as Hardin from The Leisure Hive, who is the Earth scientist who has supposedly cracked the science of tachyonics, but is actually stringing people along because he hasn't managed to figure it out. And he was the one that I went, oh, is that him? Because he's literally only on screen for like a minute with his one or two lines, and then he's gone. But I looked him up afterwards and was like, yes, that is him. And your other two are the two Shadow Mobile personnel who go along with Bradley. So they're the guys that are running around the forest with guns, who barely get any lines, and I think from their Doctor Who roles probably had a similar kind of career in that they played lots and lots of bit parts. So, and I'm probably massacring this name because I think it's Dutch, but Hein Viljoen, who I'm just guessing based on the names. I'm guessing he was the blonde one. That's some racial stereotyping there, but I'm guessing he was I'm guessing he was the blonde one. If you know it different, please let me know. He appeared in the War Games as a machine gunner.
Right.
So that
clearly
that was
on his
him.
CV it says able to follow orders and hold guns.
And hold guns and shoot weapons. Yes.
Yeah.
So he's one, and then the other guy was an actor called Dennis Plenty, which is a wonderful name, and he was never actually credited on Doctor Who, but he is an extra in. Wait for this, it's quite a long list. The Massacre, The War Machines, Frontier in Space, Death to the Daleks, where he's an Exelon, so you're not going to recognise him in that, and The Mask of Mandragora, which obviously links us to The Prisoner again, because that was filmed...
Because it was filmed in Portmeirion.
Of course, thank you very much, Michael.
And, of course, the Italian Gardens, rather than off to one side as well.
Yes.
What you do is you go down the path, and... No, leave it there, sorry.
So that's our Doctor Who watch for the week. We basically have a bunch of bit part characters who are in this episode of UFO. Sorry if you were expecting anything a little bit more exciting, but that is Doctor Who watch for the week.
And you know what? I think that's brought us to the end of this particular episode of the UFOcast.